Good evening. This is Ashley Craig, and I'll be giving a brief overview of instructional design models, or ID for short. This includes defining what instructional design is, major learning theories behind the different models, common ID models, and a real world application of one of those ID models. Let's start with a brief explanation of what instructional design is, as explained by Bruce Montes. This is a process for developing instructional systems that are rooted in scientific research and include reflective components for iterative improvements. And he emphasized those words specifically: systematic, scientific, and reflective. There are myriad approaches to instructional design with varying theoretical emphases, but what Montes himself emphasizes most is that an effective instructional design model must answer the following three essential questions: where are we going? How will we get there? And how will we know when we have arrived? This may very well be the basis for Weston Kieschnick's goal strategy tool paradigm from his book Bold School, as it's very similar. The key difference being that Kieschnick's logic takes Montes's his final question and extends it to the context of educational technology, or more specifically in his book Blended Learning, and what tool or system would be used to achieve that goal and know it. Uh, these basic definitions of and frameworks for instructional design are only the starting point, though. Throughout the years, many effective theoretical approaches have been developed and continued to evolve, um, and each with its own solutions to answer Montes's original questions there. Um, in reading Behaviorism, Cognitivism, and Constructivism uh, by Ertmer and Newby from 1993, a major differentiating component of the theories that we encounter is that the difference that stands out is the emphasis on feedback to learners, or that's what stood out to me. Maybe because I teach reading and writing, and so well, anyway. Um, but the feedback is deeply connected to the author's emphasis on Jonassen's alignment of theory with the progression of knowledge acquisition, wherein he posits that learners at the introductory level best learn with behavioral and cognitive approaches. And then as they progress to advanced learners, they also migrate toward deeper learning through constructivist approaches. And just as these approaches and theories orbit each other, so does the type of feedback necessary to progress learners from introductory to advanced and expert levels. So the feedback in behaviorism is really focused on reinforcement of desirable responses. It's basically feedback like correct, incorrect. In cognitivism, the feedback focuses on guiding and supporting what they called accurate mental connections, and I liken that to when, especially with language arts, when we actually provide the rationale. It's more than just saying incorrect. It's giving them guidance to go back and reevaluate their text evidence and come back and rethink the question to try again. And then for constructivism, the feedback focuses really more on facilitating that critical thinking in contextual and collaborative experiences. Really, constructivism is trying to nudge the learners to do the thinking rather than the feedback providing the thinking, so that they can develop those strategic patterns for real world application. That was very long winded. I'm so sorry. There are many instructional design models, and those frequently blur the lines between these approaches of behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. Um, but I think that's why Ertmer and Newby actually referred to this as the behaviorist, cognitivist, constructivist continuum, because there is a little bit of a sliding scale. As you can see, I placed rapid e-learning toward the behaviorism side. Which I'll talk about a little bit in just a second. I placed Gagny's just beyond that, and I'll elaborate on that in a moment about why I chose to put that kind of splitting the two. Addie, I felt like, is not solely sitting right in cognitivism. It's pushing toward constructivism, although I think that really, Addie, you could kind of skew it either direction depending on what your own educational philosophy is. Uh, and Dick and Carrie is the model that stands out to me as truly actually crossing over into constructivism. And I'll kind of cover those things as we go over these different models. As is implied by the name, this quick step model is incredibly flexible to enable rapid prototyping and delivery. And given the nature of the rapid e-learning design model, information about it really varies from source to source. The more I looked around, the more I found that everyone was describing it and splitting it up in different ways. So, to sum up the key ingredients that appear in many variations, there are four big chunks that of the model that really stand out. The first being establishing learning objectives, uh, then advancing to identifying the actual tool like an LMS, and starting to use the tool by using templates. And that is a huge piece of this model that actually makes it rapid. It's that you get up and go, so to speak. Once you're up off the ground, you can start using it, so you can develop the content, disseminate the content, and you can even start collecting and dissecting feedback while this is all happening. And then you just repeat, repeat, repeat. It just keeps churning. Um, this one, while reading, really seemed to me like it leans a little bit more toward like software development. But the more I read about it, the more I started to kind of wrap my head around it and feel like actually I kind of use this a lot. The rapid aspect of this model is why it falls to the behaviorist end, though, on that continuum, because when it is such rapid development, it really can only be surface level or task based instruction to be effective. And they kind of highlight that in the literature that we read. But you could make it deeper than that, but that is much more time consuming. So it doesn't really fit with the rapid element. There's some back and forth there. The next one that I had on the continuum was Gagny's 9 events of instruction, which I placed between behaviorism and cognitivism. At a glance, Gagny's could be interpreted as a behaviorist approach. However, it's at the elicit performance and the feedback steps that it really begins to leverage cognitivist learning theory as well. The event names themselves are actually quite specific, even in their brevity. What cannot be seen from this really high level view of the 9 events is that Gagny places a really enormous emphasis on feedback and all the different types of feedback that can be provided. Um, this model is widely, I mean, extensively used for structuring an instructional class period in secondary education. I think that in every school district I've worked in, this is the basic lineup of how they kind of encourage their teachers to structure their classes. Addie is the biggest one I encountered in our literature, and it's the model that I found references to everywhere I went. There are countless variations and modifications of the Addie model. I find this instructional design approach to be really simple, which is usually a good thing. This model is extensively used, and I think that probably is because of its simplicity. Egan Quigley's explanation of the Addie model from 2023 really breaks down the components of analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation in super simple terms of course or curriculum design, the most helpful of which being the prescriptive outcomes for each of the phases in this model, which I won't read to you. They're pretty self explanatory, but I really liked the way that Quigley used that explanation. And then far toward the constructivism end of the continuum is where I categorize the Dick and Carey model, which is grounded in theory that all of the elements of the process are crucial to its effectiveness. That includes the educator and the learner, the environment, the materials and activities, how those items are delivered, and so much more. This model has an embedded elasticity to it that many of the phases feed into each other and serve to form a sort of current through the process that churns out learning outcomes and iterative improvements to the plan. Uh, this model, to me, is the most applicable to the development of curriculum or units within an overarching curriculum. And it's that embedded fluidity of the model that really enables the flexibility to make adjustments in situ versus Addie, which requires each phase to be completed before moving on. But to embrace a specific approach to instructional design is more than just about using what's popular, like Addie. A key consideration in determining which model will be an optimal fit for an organization is how these models reflect the behaviorist, cognitivist, or constructivist leanings of that organization's vision, goals, and educational philosophy, which is kind of a mouthful, but basically, um, if all the district cares about is kids selecting correct answers on standardized tests, then boy, behaviorist is probably the way you want to go. But if your organization is really stressing complexity and critical thinking, then your models are probably leaning more toward Addie or Dick and Carey. For real world application, and I will try to keep this incredibly brief. I know I've already gone for a really long time. Uh, for a real world application, I'd like to return to the book Bold School that I referenced earlier. In it, Kieschnick details blended learning instructional strategies for vocabulary programs. Um, his strategy heavily emphasizes the importance of three essential elements of it. That's formal instruction, the context leading to comprehension, and visualization. Kieschnick's program advises using the common term, information, picture, or tip chart, but in a digital document rather than a notebook or an anchor chart to prime learners for reading a text. Um, Essentially, and I'm going to super oversimplify this, but What I do in class is I introduce this with each text and I change it up every time. So in the example you see here, I have given the students the definitions that fit with the context. They still have to go find its use in the text. So that kind of drives them to scanning the document. Um, they find it and read that context. Then they seek out a picture that will help them remember the definition. I have done other iterations of this where they didn't get any of the definitions and they had to go find the context of the word and then go determine which definition of that word fits the context. Um, Lots of different versions of this, but the really essential component of it is the option for the user, the learner, to select the picture that lines up with that meaning. And that brings in that mental image part, which, if you're familiar with RLA teaks, is one of them. Anyway, I'm sorry, that was already too long-winded. They gain exposure to the text structure, the targeted terminology and context, and then they use that information to build personal interpretations. That is the wording used by Kieschnick, by finding an image to illustrate the definition. I have used this strategy throughout this year in what I suspect is really a rapid e-learning application of Addy on repeat. Because language arts involves introducing new authors and texts on a regular basis, I have new vocabulary to introduce every week. So these tip charts have helped me to rapidly develop new iterations of the concept in ways that leverage different skills each time. It may be that I'm encouraging them to use their resources, so I'm guiding them toward using dictionaries. It may be that I'm pushing them to use context clues, so I might be driving them deeper into the text. But I tweak the expectations slightly each time, while keeping the majority of the activity concept the same. And because each time we tackle text-based vocabulary, it's more or less siloed from other course content. Each rapid iteration is its own tiny Addy process within the greater scope of the unit learning objectives. Um, in my opinion, this is a constructivism. I could see an argument for calling it cognitivism, um, but I think at that point it's splitting hairs. I think it's really more constructivist. Uh, Thank you for listening tonight. I know I went really long, but there was just so much to cover. I found this incredibly interesting, and I'm super excited to see what else we get into during this course. Have a great night.